Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased this morning to be launching Operation Fortress, which builds on Operation Restoring Justice, which Zia and I launched last year. This major crisis that Europe's facing began really in earnest in 2015. It followed the disastrous war in Libya and led to large numbers of people beginning to cross the Mediterranean in boats. I was there in the European Parliament at the time. The Commission President, Jean-Claude Juncker, saw this as an opportunity for the first time to launch the common EU refugee and asylum policy. What it meant was that if anybody set foot on EU soil, they would be allowed to stay. I warned against it, I railed against it, but of course to no avail. And that stupidity was compounded, of course, by Angela Merkel, saying anyone that wants to come, we can manage, we can accommodate you. And it's had pretty dire consequences. One only has to think about what's happened to the city of Malmo, previously a fairly peaceful port, now one of the murder and rape hotspots in the whole of Europe. And in many ways, in the run-up to the referendum in 2016, the reason that I launched that breaking point poster was to say Europe has given itself massive problems for decades to come, but we can avoid this by leaving the European Union and getting back control of our borders. Sadly, governments after 2016 were in power but never really believed in the Brexit project, and even when Brexit finally came, there was no change to our status with the ECHR. And that was why 5 years ago, single-handedly, I went out repeatedly into the English Channel, videoing, YouTubing the growing number of boats crossing the English Channel, and I made the argument that you might just as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover, everyone welcome, because the chances of deportation were then, and are today, so incredibly slim. I said I believed if it wasn't stopped, that it would lead literally, in numerical terms, to an invasion of our country. Well, under the Conservatives, 130,000 people arrived via that route. The vast majority, young males of fighting age, who willfully discard their iPhones and their passports into the English Channel at the 12-mile line. And I've been out and I've filmed that too. In the end, Boris Johnson reacted with a speech at Lid Airport announcing the Rwanda plan. But it was doomed to failure from day one because of our continuing presence as part of the European Convention on Human Rights. I have to say, the fact we've given the French over £1 billion and that their navy still escort boats from a couple of hundred yards off the beach all the way across to a 12-mile line, that is something that needs to stop. And whatever videos or pictures you see of the French police slashing boats, the fact is that the traffickers have become even smarter. And in the last 3 weeks, we've seen several launches coming from as far west as Normandy. All the while, the pull factor of coming to the UK, being able to stay, all the while that pull factor is still there. It doesn't matter how much money we give the French, the boats will continue to come. And of course, many of those that have come are people who in some cases wish us harm or do us harm. As we speak, there is a man, charming chap, Kalashnikov tattooed on his face, currently in prison in this country, who's threatened repeatedly to kill me, and no doubt that promise remains when he's out in a few months' time. But there isn't a single week that goes by where we don't see stories of serious crimes, sexual assaults, rapes, and we know for a fact that many that are now coming come with the deliberate attempt of joining criminal gangs in Britain as soon as they come. But it is worse than that. I first started voicing this again 5 years ago to say this would become, or could become, then, a national security emergency. And that is exactly what it is. Repeatedly, I've asked the Prime Minister, well, the last Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, in PMQs, whether he would declare a national security emergency. 2 months ago, I told the Home Secretary and the House of Commons that I had it on the highest authority that the Iranian regime was using the Channel crisis to put their own operatives across the English Channel. I was met by shouts of shame on you. Well, shame on them, because once again it proves that I was ahead of the curve on this, and indeed that is what is happening. So Operation Fortress will be a combined military operation. It will save lives, it will help the French in fulfilling their job of stopping the boats, and it will save a huge amount of money. We are very confident that our policy of securely picking people up and safely taking them back to France, we are entirely confident that that falls within other conventions of international law, and you'll see that argued clearly in this document. And when you think about it, what is the Royal Navy for? If the Royal Navy is not there to protect this country from invasion, then frankly, I can't see what its purpose is. We now see a Conservative shadow Home Secretary going into the English Channel 5 years too late and making exactly the same arguments now that I've made for 5 years. But remember, in their 2010, 15, 17 and 19 manifestos, they promised net migration down to tens of thousands a year and shouldn't be believed. And even since Andy Burnham has become Prime Minister, already 2,000 people have crossed the English Channel. There is an argument doing the rounds in the media that it's okay. It's fine. The numbers are 40% lower than they were this time last year. But it only takes one or two Iranian terrorists to come into Britain and commit a mass atrocity for this to be a disaster. The Australians faced all of these problems many years ago. They tried offshore processing. They tried a number of things, and in the end what worked was towing the boats back to Indonesia. And since then, hardly a boat has landed in Australia. I am entirely confident that under a reform government, within a fortnight, there would be no more boats. And whilst this issue may not be uppermost in the minds of many in Westminster, I can tell you out in the country, it is. And that comes down to a simple point: fairness. What is fair? What is right? What is wrong? Those who come to Britain legally now go through a long, expensive process. It's unfair on them. And to now see a situation where those that come to Britain illegally, via these means, go to the top of social housing lists all over the country is simply unfair. I do not have much confidence that this Prime Minister will grip this, but I very much hope that I'm wrong, and I will ask Zia to lay out more of the operational details. Thank you.
A nation that cannot control its borders is not a sovereign nation, and Britain is being invaded. For decades, Tory and Labour governments promised to get tough on illegal immigration, and yet year after year after year, tens of thousands of fighting-age males have arrived on our beaches. In fact, the total number of illegal immigrants in this country now stands at well over 1 million. The United Kingdom is being invaded. Over 200,000 people have landed illegally on our shores over 8 years. Now that's a staggering figure, and it exceeds the total number of Allied troops who stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Those who arrive are unvetted, mainly military-aged men from Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. Now, they have been rewarded for this by a political class that puts them up in hotels at the British taxpayers' expense, given free meals, free healthcare, free TV licenses, and even free trips to the safari park and to the cinema. And never forget, as Nigel said, that it was the Tories that allowed 130,000 to arrive. Labour is simply continuing their betrayal. Even those that commit heinous crimes are routinely defended by so-called human rights lawyers who succeed in preventing even convicted rapist illegal migrants from being deported. All thanks to Tory and Labour politicians who prioritise the rights of foreign citizens over our own. Now, some of those arriving illegally by boat have already attempted terrorist attacks on our soil. Some have committed gruesome murders. Like on the night of the 20th of October 2024, a 27-year-old young lady called Rhiannon White had just finished her shift at the Park Inn Hotel. She was on the phone to a friend as she walked to the railway station. While she was on the platform, a Sudanese man inexplicably stabbed her 23 times with a screwdriver. She died in hospital 3 days later. Her killer, Deng Majek, had arrived in the UK illegally on a small boat 3 months before the attack. CCTV footage later showed him dancing and laughing. He was living in a hotel at taxpayer expense. Rhiannon's devastated mother said in court, quote, "It's always the undocumented illegal migrants that are doing this, and it's not fair." Also among those arriving are individuals who have actively plotted terror attacks on our soil. Intelligence reports confirm that hostile actors, including Iranian terrorists, are exploiting these very routes. The safety of the British people is being put at risk every single day. And the patience of the British people is now exhausted. We're unwilling to accept that Britain's borders should be open and undefended, unwilling to accept that our own veterans who served our nation with valour and distinction are being evicted from their homes to house fighting-age males from Iraq and Afghanistan who turned up on our beaches uninvited. As Nigel said, this is a national security emergency. Yet, successive Tory and Labour governments have treated this emergency with contemptible weakness. Rather than defending the realm, they have turned state agencies into a free taxi service and provided taxpayer-funded hotels for those who break our laws. They surrendered the English Channel to criminal cartels. Under Nigel's leadership, Reform UK will end this crisis for good. We will launch Operation Fortress, the biggest military operation in the English Channel since the Second World War. Under a Reform government, Prime Minister Farage will order His Majesty's Royal Navy to ensure that not a single unauthorised vessel makes it to the shores of the United Kingdom. Our plan, as you will see in the document, is endorsed by senior former members of our armed forces. It is simple. First, we will create an integrated surveillance command, unifying military and intelligence surveillance to make ours the most surveilled maritime border in the world. Second, any vessel attempting to cross illegally will be intercepted by our armed forces, who will return them back to France. Not a single illegal migrant trying to reach our shores will make it to Britain. To those with no right to enter Britain, our border will be impenetrable. Once the world realises that crossing the Channel illegally leads only to being intercepted by our Royal Marines and returned to France, the incentive structure breaks. these economic migrants will stop paying smugglers and the boats will stop coming. Now, I know many in the media are clamouring to ask, what happens if the French don't agree and Royal Marines attempt to land people on a beach? Let me be crystal clear. A reform government will show unflinching resolve to ensure that people who set out from France to break into Britain go back to France. That is our policy, not a future negotiating position with the French government. What France gets to decide is how that happens. Now look, we would far rather disembark people in port, walk people down a gangway, and hand them to the French authorities properly. That is more dignified, and it is what we will negotiate for. And keep in mind, the official position of the French government is that they do not want these boats leaving their shores in the first place. Tory and Labour governments have paid them, as Nigel said, £1 billion of British taxpayer money to stop the boats, ostensibly. Our military would in fact be helping them comply with the very agreements that they signed. But if the Elysee Palace refuses, make no mistake, His Majesty's Royal Marines will disembark them safely on the very shore they left that morning. Those are the only two options. There is no third option, where a British government under reform just shrugs its shoulders and brings them back to Dover. That policy of Tory and Labour governments that has led to 200,000 illegal migrants arriving on our shores. That was the policy that led to the savage murder of Rhiannon White. The policy that has almost resulted in a mass casualty terrorist attack on our soil. And ask yourself what the alternative picture actually is. A president of France ordering French police onto a beach to block Royal Marines on a humanitarian mission from landing civilians in safety and forcing them back out to sea, directly endangering their lives? Well, that would be a crime against humanity. It is simply not a serious hypothetical that President Macron, or anybody else for that matter, would do that. And I do not believe the French public would stand for it if he did. And to the talking heads and useless politicians claiming this policy will not work, the evidence proves the opposite. In fact, it is the only thing that does. When Australia had a major illegal boats migration crisis, it was only when they launched a major military operation that it stopped. In fact, Tony Abbott's Operation Sovereign Borders cut illegal crossings to zero within weeks. A years-long crisis ended within weeks. And it also saved lives. Between 2007 and 2013, 1,200 migrants tragically died making the journey to Australia. The Australian military operation reduced that to zero. Over 170 migrants have already died trying to come to Britain via the Channel. Reform's proposed military operation to secure our borders will save migrant lives too. Now, expect fierce resistance from the Tory Labour establishment, claiming that this is impossible. Well, they have no choice but to call it impossible, lest they face the reality of their own failures. But the former Navy commanders who engineered this plan leave no room for doubt. It can be done. It must be done. The former senior members of our armed forces who endorsed this plan confirm this plan is viable and imperative to our national security. This is how we will stop the boats for good. Reform will end the invasion of Britain. Reform will put the British people first. Thank you.